A lot of times when I chat with a first time political candidate, they've got to ask me, okay, how do I get to the radio station? What's the address? What part of Twin Falls is it in? Uh, this candidate who's joining me this morning doesn't have to ask that question. He was just here a few days ago. Pastor Paul Thompson from Eastside Baptist Church, and I should point out, he doesn't live very far away either. It's just
No, just down the road here.
hop, skip, and a jump from the studios. And we're at 6 minutes after 9 o'clock. It is 36 on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you, too. First of all, welcome back. I've been excited about hearing this news for a long time, and I guess I was one of the few people that here I am, the biggest busybody in all of Twin Falls County, and I kept my mouth shut about this.
You did good. We had some kind of a glitch on our web design that we couldn't get fixed, and we're ready to just dump the whole process and start all over. And finally, early this morning, a breakthrough in the website, and thought, well, here we go. We're ready to launch now.
You had filed some paperwork last week.
Yeah, it's about Tuesday of last week, so the day after the opportunity to begin filing for candidacy. So my wife and I took the day and we drove to Boise. We could have done it from here, but we thought, you know what, this is a pretty significant moment. Let's go to the State House, and so we did. We made a day of it, and pleased and grateful for the opportunity. We'll see where it goes from here.
We wanted to point out, if you're just joining us and you missed part of the conversation in the last hour of the program, Pastor Thompson is a candidate in seat 24A, State House of Representatives, currently occupied by Republican Lance Clough, who I don't think even has a primary opponent yet. Maybe. I haven't heard anything yet as far as that goes.
Yeah, as of Friday, there's no other Republican candidate running for the seat.
And likely, in many cases, not even Democrat. So
Yeah.
at this point, you're the only known opponent, and you're going to be running as a Constitution Party candidate.
Right, yeah. So I've been a member of the Constitution Party for about 6 years, I think. Maybe not as long as 6 years, but just prior to the last presidential election, I, for the first time in my life, settled down on a political party. Prior to that, I was just an independent, and which meant for me, I pretty much 99% of the time voted Republican. But from time to time, with great pleasure, always pleased to vote a third party who I can get behind. And so then I stumbled across the Constitution Party and thought, man, I think I'm at home right here.
Well, the Republican Party, if you look at like the state platform,
Yeah,
it says a lot of things the Constitution Party might say,
it does.
but it's not necessarily adhered to by a lot of the candidates.
Right. And that's for me. I try to live my life as a principled man. I have stated values. My position as a pastor I'm sure has had a lot of impact on that in my life, that I desire to walk in a circumspect manner and live my life by values and principles. And so where the platform of the Republican Party is usually where I land and usually where I vote, but it is clear that as the days have moved along, some candidates in the Republican Party are far from the platform. And so I want a party that's going to hold the candidates accountable to how they're going to actually behave once they're elected, and hold them to that party platform. And so that's one of the things I've appreciated about being a part of the Constitution Party, is they do have stated values. That's basically any Republican could go and read the platform of the Constitution Party and say, that's my party. But obviously it's a small party. It's not well known. But this party will hold its candidates accountable.
Well, we've got to point out one of the main reasons you're doing this is you've become one of the biggest voices in the state of Idaho when it comes to pro-life issues. And Mr. Clough, as a Republican, is not pro-life, which I think surprises a lot of people. But he's not dishonest about it. If you ask him,
Correct.
And he even volunteered it to me. I didn't even have to ask. But you have some other issues too. You would address from a very conservative standpoint. But so this will all be fleshed out as the campaign continues. But on this particular issue, I think you felt that he was not that he was not being responsible with voters when it comes to being
Yeah,
pro-life.
I certainly would say he's not disingenuous. Just as you say, any conversation I've ever had with him about life issues, he's real straightforward. There's no surprise. Whenever I have a personal conversation, it matches the way he votes when it comes to issues related to life. So, but that shows one of the places for me where a party that presents itself as pro-life and yet the candidate is he's not hiding it in the process, but he certainly is not voting in line with the party position.
I just have an instant message from a friend who's in Christian radio, but said he could be very helpful to you during the course of the
Hey,
campaign.
I'm going to need lots of help, Bill.
That's the thing. If people want to start finding out more about this, first of all, go to the website, right?
Yeah, votepaulthompson.com. That's the website that my web designer and campaign manager, her name's Renee Thompson, my wife. So she has that up and ready. It has we've already posted there several of the primary positions that we've stated, and they're things from education to taxes, small government, and of course life and where we stand on all life regardless of how it's conceived, and from conception until natural death, that all life is valuable. And the state of Idaho has an interest in the preservation of life.
We wanted to mention Pastor Paul Thompson joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 12 minutes after 9 o'clock. If you've got a question or comment for the pastor, that's 208 736 0300, 208 736 0300. And again, he is a candidate for state representative in District 24A, and he'll be challenging Republican Lance Clough come this fall in the election in November. Obviously, these things, running a campaign is not something you can do on the cheap. Although I guess to some degree you certainly can in this day and age of social media. But is there going to be a possibility if people wanted to contribute, could they do that?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Bill. And they can on the website, votepaulthompson.com. They'll find a support page with a donate, so they can donate via PayPal or a credit card, or they can write a check out to Paul for Idaho, and find me somewhere in Twin Falls, and I'll be glad to take that. A dollar, $10. It's we're a grass. It seems like every politician says we're a grassroots campaign. I got nothing else. There's going to be rarely a corporation that's going to want to say I want to put my name behind that guy.
Well, I mentioned in the last hour of the program that they're going to have a difficult time. As you know, normally in politics, you do attack people. We saw a piece that surfaced in a local newspaper last fall during a campaign for city council where a candidate was attacked, and somebody just calmly went over and dropped off some details to the newspaper, and it got published. But it would be a little difficult for people to, I think, besmirch your character. We should say you haven't been arrested in the United States.
That's correct.
When you were arrested in Haiti, you did it. It was in service of our Lord.
Yeah.
And you were released. In fact, I think that will enhance.
Yeah, and we actually even put a little piece explaining that on the website so that we don't have to wait for the surprise announcement of that. It's for 10 years now. It's been a public matter. We've embraced it. I travel to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, a couple of times a year. So all of that, the fiery ordeal that happened right after that earthquake is actually part of a glorious story. And so by the grace of God, we endured suffering for a temporary time. And out of that, we have a home where we have 60 children that we take care of and provide housing, education, medical care, all those great and glorious things.
And other aspects, you haven't been arrested for DUI.
No.
You haven't smoked marijuana.
No.
You apparently got good grades in school.
Yeah. School was kind of a problem for me from time to time.
You go to church on Sundays.
I do.
Of course, you have to be there.
Even when I don't have to, wherever I'm at, I cannot stand to not be in church. So I do attend church all the time.
We've got a caller looking to join us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX with Pastor Paul Thompson.
I just recently heard about the Constitutional Party. Could you explain what that what they stand for?
Yeah, listen, thanks for that question. And I would say if you check out my website, votepaulthompson.com, and on that homepage, about two-thirds of the way down, you'll see the platform for the Constitution Party. There's the Constitution Party of Idaho and the Constitution Party, which is the national representation of the Constitution Party. But it's basically, if you're familiar uh, with the Republican Party, small government, local education control, the reduction of taxes, the unnecessary attack against life and the value of all people. But you would find that if you're at home with the Republican Party, you won't find anything inside the Constitution Party platform that would be a surprise to you. The difference would be, I think that there's a stronger stated position about life in the Constitution Party than there is in the Republican Party. However, the Republican Party has a strong position that I'm pleased to be behind whenever I vote. And there's rarely a Constitution Party member available for me to vote for, but when there is, I do.
Now, it's a party strong on the Second Amendment,
Yes. Oh
strong
yeah.
on national borders,
Yes.
state sovereignty. All of these things are because, again, it's based on the
It
Constitution.
is. It really is a position to say that we do believe that the Constitution is a closed document. So, in other words, it's not up for reinterpretation today. And so that means we have to go and read and be familiar with what were the founders meaning when they wrote these documents, when they laid out the Bill of Rights. What were they saying about that whenever they were writing it? And when we know what they were saying about it when they were writing it, we know how to interpret it today based upon why they put those things into place. So yes, strong, very strong Second Amendment. So
We want to thank the caller, and what we'll do is we'll get to a break in a minute, but if you can stick around a bit longer,
sure.
perhaps we can take some more telephone calls. And oddly enough, as we started this conversation a few minutes ago, I got, and these are generated by, they're sent out as an email blast. I got the weekly update from State Representative Clow in my email. And so he may be unaware that this has happened. Although, if they're checking filings, this was public knowledge, public record for the last week.
Yeah, it's been known. It's been on public file since last Tuesday.
And obviously somebody just overlooked it.
Apparently.
It's not like you've been to the Capitol doing much business lately.
No.
But you can't recognize that name. Oh, right, that testimony. We've got more on the way with Pastor Paul Thompson in just a few minutes. And again, he is a candidate for state representative. He will be challenging Republican Lance Clow for seat 24A in the Idaho State Legislature. And again, if you've got a comment or question for Pastor Thompson, hold on to that. We've got a break in just a moment. 35 right now on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. And do want to point out, if you don't know the number, it's 208-736-0300. You can also send a question or comment via the app feature on your smartphone. Pastor Paul Thompson from Eastside Baptist Church in Twin Falls joining us on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. We're at 34. It's 921. Bill Colley handling the telephones. If you've got a comment or question for the pastor, it's 208-736-0300, 208-736-0300. And again, you can also send me messages via the app function. If you've not yet done it, you can download our app, News Radio 1310 KLIX app, for your smartphone. In fact, I've got a message from Brock today in Twin Falls who said it was a great announcement. I mean, people are energized in some cases about this, Pastor.
I'm grateful to hear that, and I'm going to need all the support I can. Being from a lesser known party and first time attempt of running for a public office, I appreciate the encouragement, and I'll appreciate. November's a long way away from today, so we'll have to remind the voters to not forget when November comes around.
What was the reaction with the congregation when you mentioned you were going to run for legislature?
Yeah, my church is such a kind people, and they're very appreciative, and they're very supportive. I was humbled by their kind response, and they're of course now churches don't get behind and endorse candidates, and so I've assured my church You don't feel obligated. You have to vote for me. Feel free to vote against me if you want. But that's the beauty of the voting electorate. We have the privilege to go out and let our voice be heard.
My guess is, though, that Christians, especially if the more evangelical or biblically centered approach to Christianity, because right now we seem to have two different interpretations of Christianity in this valley,
Yeah.
but that they're more likely to turn out and vote because there's certain issues that are so important to them. So if you have a few hundred people in Twin Falls, and it could be higher than that. I mean, you figure that your two co-hosts on Pastors Roundtable, if they bring their congregations along, they don't have to say to them, vote for Paul Thompson. Those people are
Right.
likely going to vote for Paul Thompson anyway. And then, a number of other churches within the Twin Falls region would also turn out perhaps hundreds of people. That could be the difference maker on an election.
It could, and Bill, I think that one thing that's true about the average uh, church-going individual who loves his God, he loves his country, loves his family. He's going to be a little bit more interested in particulars of the values behind the candidates. And so I'll be pleased to answer questions that people have, like what this lady asked earlier about the Constitution Party. I'm sure that's going to be one of my first or most popular questions. I've never heard of this party before, and what do they mean and what do they stand for? And so I will appreciate that. But I think the God-fearing citizens who love God and love their country, I want to say to them, come on in and join me in the campaign. Come and be a part of it, and we'll see. My greatest desire here, Bill, is to glorify God, and I'm pleased to put my name in the ring and make a run for it.
I have a note here from a writer in Twin Falls who said, "What a great day." He said, "I'm a Republican, but after talking to Mr. Clow last year, I knew I would not be voting for him ever again." And the writer said, "So having a candidate like this to vote for just makes my day. Way to go, sir," he says.
Mm.
And then another writer from Hammett says, "Thank you for giving the CP a chance." Meaning Constitution Party.
Yeah, yeah. Well, those are humble things to hear from people, and I'll be pleased to represent valued voters who love their God, who love their country, who love their families, and there really is something beautiful about the land that we live in, that where it's founded on a principle that is rooted in the Bible. And a lot of times people want to say there's no place for a religion inside of politics, and what we forget, the Constitution's intent was not to keep the influence of God out of the government, but it was to keep the government's influence out of the church. And so what I just want to do is, especially in the areas that are most closest to home, like education, parental rights. Man, our parental rights are being attacked by our state and our national level. Education is not in the local control like it should be. Obviously, this issue of abortion, we've been murdering 60 million babies. We have murdered over 60 million babies since 1973. And it's time for a state to rise up and say, if you want to do it in your state, that's your prerogative, but no longer in our state, is what I want to say.
I think a lot of this comes down to this is that a lot of people feel that some Republicans, I won't say all, most of them that I know are very good,
Yeah,
but some
they are.
Republicans will tell you, well, I'm fully in agreement with you, but gee, I can't do anything about this right now, or it's not our area, or it almost sounds as if everyone's just trying to sweep away all of these things, and that the public, I think, is sick and tired of get along, go along.
I agree, Bill. And for me, for the last 4 years at least, I've been heavily involved in addressing my government, local, the city, my national, and been the last couple of years very active addressing my state legislators. That you know what, we can do something about this, and we have to stop listening to people tell us that this is something that the Supreme Court tells us we can't do. Right now, for example, Bill, this week in the Senate side of the government, they're going to introduce a bill that is essentially says that we're going to abolish abortion in the state of Idaho when the Supreme Court tells us we can. And I say we're not going to bow down to the Supreme Court. Our duty here is first to the Almighty God, and then it is to the people of the state of Idaho. It's not to the Supreme Court.
We've
And
got a
so,
caller. I
yeah.
just want to squeeze a caller in here before the break. Caller, you're on the air with Pastor Paul Thompson on KLIX.
So glad to hear that somebody's trying to do a constitutional conservative party because I firmly believe that the Constitution makes everything fair for everyone. You may not like everything. You may have things work for you or against you. My only worry is that you'll get people in there saying they're from the Constitutional Party, and then within a short period of time start voting things on things that are against our Constitution. And will you uphold that? That you will never do that.
Yeah, listen, I think he makes a valid point that I think this is a true case on at every party's platform that eventually they begin to shift and if you could even put it in a driving kind of an illustration, they begin to drift out of their lane and end up in a lane that is completely opposed to and running in the opposite direction of where they once were. And so I think that it'll be true for the Constitution Party as the days move along. If the party grows and the party has more and more candidates, and by the way, there are several other candidates across the state of Idaho that have some Constitution Party members running, and so it will be important that the party will hold those candidates when they get elected. They hold them to the party platform. Otherwise, they too will they'll do the same natural drifting into the other lane before too long, and they'll look just like every other party.
I want to thank the caller. If you could stick around a few more minutes, we've got a
Sure.
break coming up. There's still a few more things we want to touch upon. Pastor Paul Thompson joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And he is a candidate for District 24A, a state representative seat currently held by Republican Lance Clow. Bill Colley with you as well on Magic Valley this morning. Pastor Paul Thompson from Eastside Baptist Church in Twin Falls with us this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We're at 35. Bill Colley on Magic Valley this morning. And if you didn't know it, you're just joining us. Pastor Thompson is now a candidate, became official with his filing last week, a candidate for a state representative seat, District 24A, currently held by Republican Lance Clow. Pastor Thompson is running on the Constitution Party line. We should point out it's not constitutional, it's Constitution Party.
Correct.
Because like Democrats like to call themselves Democratic Party, even though it's not officially, it's Democrat.
Right.
We've got a caller with us. I do want to point out the number 208-736-0300. 208-736-0300. It's 34 at 934. And caller, you're on the air.
That's
Call-
great news. Glad to hear you're running. I was wondering what you think what we can do, locally even to shore up this red flag laws is becoming such a hot topic nowadays with our Second Amendment. Have you thought much what we can do to, help ensure that these things don't become a problem for us locally and statewide even? I'm just curious.
Yeah,
Not a
listen.
gotcha question.
Yeah, hey, thanks for that question. And our Second Amendment is really one of those. It's one that we can never let down. We can never set this one down. We can never concede it and say, okay, we'll let you have these guns, but not these guns. Was once we start letting any of that slide away from us, then it won't be long. Then the taking and the restricting of all the others becomes much more easy. And the next thing we're like those states that are requiring, if you don't have a permit for this kind of gun and for that kind of gun, you're looking at fines and jail time and felonies. And so we just got, as a state of Idaho, we have to stay pressing our legislators. We cannot let them at any point get a pass on these kind of issues. The Second Amendment, we cannot let it down. We must not set down the Second Amendment.
I want to thank the caller. And a number of things that are going to come up. You referenced education earlier, and you'd like to see more local control. The current holder of this seat, Lance Clow, is a proponent of Common Core, although his committee apparently opposed him on that.
Right. He's the chairman of the Education Committee, and in the vote about the Common Core issue this year, Lance Clow and one other Republican voted alongside of the Democrats who wanted to keep Common Core in the state of Idaho. And so, I think that there's another place where the voter just has to stay constantly engaged to see, well, what kind of concessions are we making at the state side, and what are we surrendering, and what are we giving up to the federal government, who's just nothing more than a constant demander of more rights to be taken away from us. The Constitution does not give any permission to the government to infringe on these rights. So the electorate, the people, must stay engaged, must stay informed, and you got to continue to communicate with these legislators and tell them, do not surrender our rights. Keep them for us. They're ours.
I'd like to think that at least you'd be consistent on all of these things when you get to Boise. You'd be saying to yourself,
Yeah.
And I think part of that is that background, as you pointed out earlier, being a pastor. There's not a lot of wavering that generally goes on in character once you actually are in that position.
Yeah, and I think everyone lives their lives off of some level or some stated form of principles. So to say I'm a principled man, it really isn't saying anything more than anyone else, because I think everyone's living their lives. They're making their decisions based on some kind of a principle. I owe my principles to the instructions of Scripture. I surrender myself to the authority of Almighty God. I don't shy away from it. I'm not ashamed of it. I speak it. I live it. I strive to live in such a place. And so whenever I say I'm a principled man, that means for me, and I want the listener, I want the voter to consider what that means for them if they were to vote for someone like me, that I will strive to be consistent both in what I'm saying I'm going to go to the State House to do, and then they can hold me accountable to that which I state I'm going to do, along with that I've said it, and that I have a party who supports and backs up the position of what I would state I'm doing.
Well, we've only touched on a few subjects, so we might as well make an hour out of this.
Let's do it, man.
Yeah, we got a break coming up shortly, but Pastor Paul Thompson joining us today on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 36. Bill Colley with you too until 10 a.m. We do want to point out, if you're just joining us, Pastor Thompson is a candidate for State Representative Seat 24A, which is based here in Twin Falls County, and that is currently held by Republican Lance Clough. The difference between the two of them, the most obvious one, is Pastor Thompson is pro-life, and Representative Clough is pro-choice, meaning that he said, as he said to me one time, he said, I would not, I don't have the right to tell a woman what to do with her own body. So that is one of the big differences, but we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other issues as well coming up in just a few minutes here on the program today. And of course, more of your calls, and I have a number of messages that have come in already via the app feature this morning, as well as on Instant Messenger. Keep those coming because we'll try to address those in the next 20 minutes. Stick around. I was just thinking during the break, of course, Pastor Paul Thompson is going to be the Constitution Party candidate for District 24A in the Idaho State Legislature. That's a representative seat currently held by Republican Lance Clough. And I was thinking that probably some Republicans at the moment are thinking, what sort of offer can we make the pastor to drop out? And I thought, it profits a man not to sell his soul for the world.
I don't know, a donut or two you might find out how cheap I am.
I just don't see you selling out to anyone on this situation.
No, not on this one.
That's the standards that come along with being a Christian. We're at 36. It's coming up on 9:44. Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX as well, and newsradio1310.com. We were just talking off air about school choice and some of these, because this is one of the things I like about Twin Falls. You drive around and you don't have to go very far before you see private schools, Christian schools. You've got a number of alternatives that have been set up in this community for parents who simply don't feel that the government schools any longer are providing an education, or they feel that education is indoctrination. Right. But you were telling me off air, your wife was a school teacher for a time, and federal control means there's not a lot of teaching that actually goes on.
Yeah, unfortunately, listen, bless the Lord for school teachers. They've throughout all of the history of our nation, school teachers have had a massive part of the investment of the next generation. And I think that the intention of school teachers is at that very place. But the unfortunate thing here is that whenever the state gave up local control of education and let the federal government do this through the Department of Education, that all of that control now is mandated from the federal level. And so those requirements get pushed over to the teachers, and they have to teach to the federal standards rather than to the values of the people in the local control. And so my wife told me one time that most people would be pretty surprised that about 70% of a teacher's time, and this is probably not a scientifically proven statistic, but from the field of a teacher who's teaching in an elective class, that about 70% of her time is devoted to classroom management, and the other 30% is devoted to actually teaching the subject. And if that's the case in the classroom, then obviously our teachers need to be liberated so they can teach and not manage the classroom. In other words, keeping the class under control and keeping it from being a wasted moment with them.
Well, you've got a local school that can't even account for $1.5 million, and
Right.
sometimes I wonder, wouldn't it be best just to turn around and say, allow parents to choose where their kids are going to go to school? Simply,
Right.
and just break down that system altogether, because parents probably have a better idea how they want their children educated than the government.
Right. I mean, isn't it best if education is at the most local level, and that meaning, so we start looking at jurisdictions, and the most local level of education that it can be best suited for is for parents. Parents to take up if they choose to want to homeschool their children, listen, you live in no better state than the state of Idaho to be a homeschooled parent. If you want your children in a Christian school, if you want your children in a charter school, if you want your children in some other kind of an alternative school, you live in no better state than the state of Idaho to accomplish those things. But you're going to have to do something to keep those things and to keep the federal government, the Federal Department of Education, out of all levels of education. Leave it to the people of the state of Idaho, and the state of Idaho will be better for it, and the United States of America will be better for it.
One thing you may be hearing about as well from folks, and we talked about this with Twin Falls County Commissioner Don Hall earlier this morning, the property tax issue. We've seen that growth here in Twin Falls. Uh, that is, for some people, it's becoming, as he put it, he said, it really harms the first-time buyers of homes, the younger people, and then the older people who've retired. And all of a sudden, they maybe only paid $85,000 for that house. It's now valued at $230,000, and they're getting hit with these big tax bills, and they wonder how they can even stay in these homes. What do we have to do to control that?
Yeah, my goodness. Here's a monster that is so big, Bill, that we can't just eliminate all these taxes in in one legislative year. It's going to have to be a serious dialogue to readdress income taxes and property taxes. These are taxes that our founding fathers felt were unnecessary and were really the place where the people should not be taxed. And so you can't just overnight flip a switch, because you're taking probably the largest form of income revenue for local governments, property taxes, and the federal government in the levels of income taxes. You can't just eliminate those overnight. What you got to do is start trimming off all of those monsters that are demanding money, and then you can start addressing the tax issues and reducing them. Even to the point, wouldn't it be a great thing? I mean, everyone would love to hear the news that we no longer have an income tax. Well, that's not going to happen overnight, because we've been feeding the national monster taxes for so long that it will continue to devour us until we start taming it and controlling it, trimming it up.
We've got a caller. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air at 9:48 on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. Good morning, Paul. Really great news to hear Paul's in the running, and Paul's background should be able for everybody to support him over who we've got in office today. I think one of the biggest things we could do to get people like Paul elected, and some other good challengers that probably are coming along, are just for the voting public to get educated on who they have versus who they could have. And there's going to have to be some trust involved in. We've got a pretty messed up system in Boise, and the only way we can fix that is to change the representation. We don't have conservative representation. We have people with R's behind their name who should be conservative, but the reality is their voting record states exactly the opposite. They're voting with the left-sided candidates instead of the conservatives. And as long as schools, government programs, as long as we're on the federal dole, the federal government will partially control what our state government does. It's just how it works. There is no free money, and we've got to get over the idea in the legislature that lining up with the feds is the best thing for us to do. We need to be more independent, and our state legislators are there to represent the people, not federalized government. And I think Paul would be a great man to put in the state house to take care of that problem.
Hey, listen, I appreciate the phone call, and I'm shaking in my boots when you say those kinds of things, realizing that it really is going to take, as the caller made mention of early in these comments, Bill, it's going to take the people to essentially begin to replace the current representation. And so we've got to start the movement, and we can't wait another generation to start a recovery of the Constitution, the intentions of the Constitution in the state of Idaho. We've got to do it now. We've got to have the people have got to rise up now and take control of things before it's completely lost for us. I agree with the caller. We got to do something. We got to do it now.
I want to thank the caller for chiming in. Telephone number to reach Pastor Paul Thompson this morning, 208-736-0300. We're at 36. It's 9:51. Bill Cully on Magic Valley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX. We just talked a little bit about the size of government. I heard a clip, and I shared it earlier today, where Heather Scott was offering this, I think, late last week. The figure, and I'm not so sure if it's just one particular item or if it's the entirety of what the state gives to public television. Yeah. But a figure she cited was $8 million. That would be a yearly tab. Now, I realize for a lot of legislators, they like this because there's a TV show on public TV where they get FaceTime. So right. They're taking my tax money to promote themselves while we're doing it to communicate with the public. Well, you're promoting yourself by being on that show. I don't believe that, you see, these are the types of things when we talk about taxes. I run a radio station here where we have to survive on advertising. We have to build an audience, and then, it's a traditional American way, it's capitalism, and then you build a large enough audience that attracts advertisers. Right. Then they spend money on advertising. It keeps the lights on, keeps the place going, and you do it that way. Public TV, on the other hand, is subsidized against my wishes with my tax money.
Right.
And these are the types of things you expect them in a liberal state, but you don't expect them in what's supposedly a conservative state. And I bet that's just one area. I bet if you start looking through that budget, you're going to find some ridiculous things that we're funding, even though these Republicans, and that generally have been good stewards. It's not California, obviously, or Illinois.
Exactly.
But they're still, if we continue down this road, we'll be those places.
We will, especially if you're paying attention at all to what's being presented to our legislature this session alone. And I would say bless the Lord for representatives like Heather Scott and Priscilla Giddings. There's a dozen more others who are true to the party platform of the Republican Party, and they stand up and they speak and they argue for this conservative, fiscally conservative, morally conservative position of the Republican Party. But by and large, we're finding across the landscape of the state as a whole that really we're not being represented by those who claim to be representing our values. And so private industry is always better. The government does better whenever industry is left to the private people. I read recently that the advancement of air flight. There was a time when the United States federal government was actually hiring a group of people to learn how to take flight, and they spent enormous amounts of U.S. tax dollars money. Failed attempt, failed attempt, failed attempt, and eventually they gave up. Well, when they gave up, they didn't return their money back to the government for not discovering how to fly. But these privatized Wright brothers were convinced we can fly. And out of their own money, they learned how to fly. And what a great thing it is that the private industry is where the nation and where the state, where the local actually takes flight. No pun intended. We take flight better whenever we leave it to the private industry rather than to the government.
By the way, are you aware of anyone currently serving in the state legislature from the clergy?
There was a gentleman, Tim Remington, up in North Idaho that was appointed.
He was shot a couple of years ago.
He was, yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. He was appointed by the governor to take the seat of another representative in that area. I'm not aware of anyone else who's run for office who's a pastor of a church, but
Some states, though, it's fairly common. I mean,
it
to see
really
that happen.
is. Yeah, I have a dear friend in Oklahoma, Dan Fisher. He's been in my church, preached before. Been in. A matter of fact, whenever we've held a couple of conferences in Boise and here in Twin Falls, that Dan Fisher, he was a state representative, pastor of a Baptist church in Oklahoma, ran for governor, wasn't elected, but a well-respected gentleman in Oklahoma, but yes, in many other states.
Well, we had a governor of Arkansas named Mike Huckabee, who
Oh, exactly.
was Southern
He was
Baptist,
he
by
was
the
a
way.
Southern Baptist preacher as well.
Yeah, and nearly president. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this has happened before because you will see critics that will come along and
Yeah.
they'll start harping about that because apparently if you're an accountant, it's okay, but if you're a preacher, it's not.
Yeah, well, I even get this whenever I speak to my local government, and there's the comments that follow out of the newspaper or on my own personal messages that people will send me. They always want to say, we want to keep, you have no right to speak. Until you start paying taxes, you don't have a right to speak. And they don't know. I pay a lot of taxes. I'm not a tax exempt individual. And so I do have a voice inside of our government. And I quite frankly believe there's a lot of people that agree with where I stand.
Got about a minute left. The website again.
Yeah, go to votepaulthompson.com, and there you'll find a list of issues that I've already made some positions on, and I cite the Constitution Party of Idaho, their platform position inside of that, and I think the listener, you go there, you're going to find yourself ready to vote for me in November.
And again, people can also make a contribution.
They can, yeah, that website, there'll be a support page. Go there and click on that, and I'll bless the Lord for your kindness in contributing to the cause.
I know your phone's going to be really busy today.
I did turn it off when I came in here because it has been buzzing and beeping most of the hour.
A lot of people are going to be wanting to talk to you in the next several days, and we look forward to doing it again soon, obviously. And I'm glad you at least made the decision to do this. I think anybody who really feels strongly about this, an old comment is, well, then why don't you run?
Yeah.
But I think it's less than 1% of the American population will ever run for public office.
That's pretty small, isn't it? Bill, I appreciate the opportunity to come on this morning. Other than my church and other than my family, you were the first person I had any conversation with, and so I count even this moment a kindness from you to be here this morning.
The pizza was pretty good that
The
day,
pizza
too.
was great that day, wasn't it?
I wanted to thank Pastor Paul Thompson for dropping by. And again, he is a candidate. He is running on the Constitution Party line for seat 24A in the Idaho House of Representatives against Republican Lance Clow. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back here tomorrow morning between 6 and 10 a.m. on Magic Valley This Morning. The Rush Limbaugh program is up next.